Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Ann Harmer. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Services at Innovative Sterilization Technologies, the maker of OneTray. I have over 43 years of administrative and clinical management and internal and external consulting experience in both inpatient, outpatient, and multi-campus healthcare facilities. I have successfully provided medical and surgical consulting services to over 300 clients nationally and internationally. My career demonstrates increasingly challenging healthcare leadership positions. Many opportunities over the years I've experienced speaking at local, regional, and national symposiums and conventions. I served as the national symposium I served as the national president of the American Society of Ophthalmic Registered Nurses and performed accreditation and CMS surveys for 24 years. While there are many skilled individuals that make up the surgical team, I believe that the processing department for any surgical facility plays the most essential role of that team. Without clean and sterilized instrumentation and implants, there should not be any surgery performed. My presentation this afternoon will cover the basic terminology that is used every day in a processing department. It is necessary for staff to understand the basics if they are to perform the safest and effective delivery of the needed instrumentation and implants for surgery. So as they say, let's start at the very beginning because it's a good place to start. So we're going to talk about immediacy, event-related and expiratory dating and define those. A little bit about shelf life, very important. The differences between terminal and IUSS steam sterilization. And we're actually going to start off by talking just about that, sterilization. So sterilization is the process validated used to render a product free from viable microorganisms. We're killing the bugs. Steam sterilization is the process, though, that uses saturated steam under pressure for a specific exposure time and at a specific temperature as the sterilizing agent. When you read an IFU, you get to read how long something needs to be sterilized and at what temperature. And that is the essence of steam sterilization. So in order for sterilization to occur, though, 3 essential conditions must be met. The first is that instruments we know need to be thoroughly cleaned and decontaminated before they're subjected to a sterilization process. You can steam sterilize something forever and a day, and if it hasn't been decontaminated and cleaned, the item is not considered sterile. The second condition is that there must be the capability of killing microorganisms. That must be created. So you need to have the sterilant and the sterilizer vessel, namely a sterilizer, an autoclave, that's capable of killing microorganisms. And one of the things that's really important where your sterilizer is concerned is not only following the IFU, but making sure that you maintain the sterilizer the way that it's supposed to be. And thirdly, the sterilizing agent in this particular case, which is steam, must contact all the surfaces of the item. Sufficient time, again according to the IFU, and under appropriate conditions. That includes temperature, humidity, the concentration. So they're the basics of what needs to be accomplished before you can call an item sterile. Now, Microbial lethality is a very important concept to understand. It's referred to as what's defined as 10 to the negative 6 sterility assurance level. Remember, we just discussed that sterilization is a validated process that renders microorganisms or a product free from viable microorganisms. Something that always seems to get lost in translation when I'm having conversations with individuals with a sterilization background is that whether you terminally sterilize or perform IUSS, microbial lethality should be achieved. 10 to the negative 6 is still achieved whether you're terminal or IUSS. Microbial lethality is the end game. Now, there is a one-word difference between terminal and IUSS. If you look at the left side of the slide here, you'll see that it's underlined in green, and every definition, if you follow AORN, you will see that storage is key to terminal. If you follow and you say to a surveyor or an inspector that you're following AAMI ST79, then you'll see in the current definition that storage is part of being terminal. And if you really want to go back to what I consider an outdated, but yet still current piece of literature, it was a CMS doctrine that was dated 2014 to the surveyor force, but you can see that it certainly does say that devices should be stored or could be stored for later use. Now, if you look on the flip side of the slide, on the right side, you will see the multi-society position paper of 2011. We're going to talk a little bit more about that specifically in a future slide. But you'll see, if you go down 3/4 of the way, that it says that a sterilized item intended for immediate use is not stored for future use, nor held from one case to another. Again, following AAMI ST79, on page 7 of their current document, you'll see the definition at 2.50 for immediate use steam sterilization. Almost verbatim, it continues to say not stored. Now, that is very important when you come to one tray. There is a host of confusion out there because in the 510K for one tray, it included performance testing with shelf life of 2 days or 48 hours. This is a fact. Remember, the title of this presentation is Know the Facts. I'm all about facts. And so the FDA has certainly acknowledged that one tray has storage of 48 hours as far back as the 510K. Storage is storage. The literature does not go into definitions of what is storage or what isn't storage. The testing is done for storage. So very important to be understanding of this specific terminology. The difference between terminal and IUSS is one word, and that one word is storage. Now we're going to move along and talk about shelf life as I promised. Now shelf life, this definition is taken again directly out of the current version as cited down below of AAMI ST79 2017. Shelf life is also called storage, but when the term is used with respect to a sterilized medical device, it's the period of time during which the item is considered safe to use. So what do you need to understand in your organization? A basic premise that you need to have is that current industry guidelines permit an organization to define shelf life. we see in the industry definition provided by Amy, it's when an item is still considered safe to use. However, what your organization needs to do is it needs to define in writing in an organizational document, usually in the minutes of a meeting, whether it be the OR meeting or a meeting that Central pertains to and attends, or it could be in the Surgical Services Department meeting, but somewhere in writing, if you say to a surveyor or an inspector that you follow Amy SD 79, it needs to be formally chosen. And that formal chosen needs to be for shelf life. Are you then saying that you're going to be following expiratory dating or event related? Now, when I first went into the OR, there was no such thing as event related. Everything was expiratory dating. So let's look a little further into those two concepts. And let me do a compare and contrast for you. So we'll talk about event related, and we're going to talk about expiratory dating. So event related sterility maintenance is not based, it says it right in the definition, on expiration dating, but it actually takes into play factors concerning how you store it, the quality of the packaging material, the methods and conditions of transport, and the amount and conditioning of handling. So the easiest way to know, I ask this question repeatedly of many in the field, and I get very quizzical blank stares. And so one of the easiest ways for me to help staff out when I ask the question is I will ask, when you look at your in-house sterilized goods, do you have a sterilization date, or do you have a sterilization date and an expiration date? So the easiest way to know which one you are following is if your organization only has a sterilization date on your sterilized in-house packaging. You would then be following event-related sterility practices. However, if you go back to what I did in the 70s and you have a sterilization date and an expiration date, then you are following the concept as listed under 2.34 of expiratory dating. And that means that you would have a sterilization date as well as an expiration date on your package. What's really important to note, though, is that over 95% of the country uses event-related practices. Why is that? Well, there's a couple good reasons. Number one, it eliminates constant checking of dates. I can tell you as an OR nurse, many weekends did I have to go through cabinets on my hands and knees because the organization where I was said that if you steam sterilize something, it was only good for 30 days. So the weekend help got to go through all of the packaging, peel packs, wrap. Rigid containers didn't exist back then, but for those two kinds of packaging materials, we had to check every out date, take them down, tear them down, as we would say, and repackage them and re-sterilize them, and of course, redate them. Another reason is that it definitely saves money. Think about the fact that if you're still considered that the conditions for event-related sterility maintenance is being honored, then why are you constantly ripping items out of peel packs, wrapped, or reassembling closed containers, container systems, when in fact nothing has occurred to them? So definitely that. It also saves on wraps, filters, biological indicators, and chemical indicators, because then you wouldn't be constantly retesting them every so many days. But one action specifically that organizations do need to take is to make sure that their storage area, where they're in quotes maintaining all of their packaged materials, no matter whether you're event related or expiratory dating, is to make sure that that storage area is the best it can be and doesn't pose any issues. For example, a leaking heating, ventilation, and air conditioning filter over the shelving unit where you have your sterilized packages. Or perhaps not too long ago, I visited an organization that had an entire hole in their ceiling right above their shelving unit that had, in quotes, sterilized packaging underneath that hole. So you really want to look at the general environment and make sure that your environment is not compromising the sterilization and the work that you did. Now, a test question that I love to ask people is, if you've chosen, your organization has chosen to be event related, could you possibly be also expiratory dating in a sense? And again, there is a kind of tricky answer to that. And if you said and stated that you're event related, there is a possibility that you could have an expiration date on a package. And so, although that would be rare, the instance that I would suggest to you is, if you have an item that is contained within your packaging that has a useful life, in other words, it doesn't last forever. Let's say it is, for example, is a balloon. A balloon, the patency of the balloon is not going to last forever. And if you're event related, you can keep that item on the shelf until there's an event that considers it or makes it unsterile or compromised. So a balloon is not going to live forever on a shelf. So what you would do then is that you would have your exception to your rule, because you've delegated event related as your practice, but you would then provide an expiration date on that specific tray, because that specific tray would not have a forever life. And with that, you would have basically the both worlds coming together. But usually you do not choose to be event related and then issue a time frame of when all of your items would be expiring. That's kind of an oxymoronish policy that you would adapt. So event related, expiratory dating. Again, very important for an organization to understand what it is that they've chosen. So I promised to go back and talk about the 2011 Multi-Society position paper. Now, that paper that is still referenced today was created to stop the practice of incomplete processing in the decontamination and cleaning. There was nothing magical about taking the word flash and changing it to IUSS, except the thought was that if the name was changed, then the process would flow from that. Something new, something unique, not magical. I can say that to you because I sat in every meeting and was an active participant on this specific team that produced this position paper, this white paper in 2011. So switching back a little bit to one tray now, this is where, again, there's some confusion and even frustration, because individuals out there will want to tell you that a one tray is considered IUSS. And I would ask, how could that be? Because you see, one tray was cleared by the FDA in 2006. That's 5 years before this term was ever created. The change in technology does provide confusion. However, one tray predates this 2011 Multi-Society position paper. So the industry, again, defines that the difference between terminal and IUSS is storage. And one tray has storage since the 2006 510K was cleared by the FDA. So it's hard for anyone to put in writing that immediate use steam sterilization, or IUSS, as we affectionately refer to it, is what one tray is, in quotes, considered. The FDA does state that we have 48 hours storage. So there is a major conflict of terms as to what is accepted and what our competitors would even like to profess. They just don't match. You can't be IUSS and have storage. They are absolutely opposing terms. So let's move on, and I'm going to make you really crazy because I'm going to flip back a few slides and then come back to this one because I think it's important to put it right back out there. So excuse me while I flip back a few and show you back here. So when we looked at this particular slide, on the right-hand side, you'll see in bold, in italicized print, that immediacy, rather than being defined according to a specific time frame, is established through the critical analysis and expert collaboration of the healthcare team. If you follow Amy ST79, I'm going to go back to the slide that we were just speaking of now. But if you say that you are following, bear with me while I just get back to this slide, it tells you that you should be defining immediacy. So if you need to define immediacy, what I've provided here is basically if you see that you're using a tray with storage, then what you can do is, down by adoption of term immediacy, your organization again is going to be required to document that in writing. And so from that documentation, then whoever is responsible for your policies and procedures, then I would suggest that you refer to this because immediacy is recognized when a sterilization process involves the use of a packaging system that cannot be stored for future use. Remember, you cannot define yourself by putting something in a packaging system that you're now going to call it IUSS. Because sterile barrier systems that you're using for IUSS had to have been cleared by the FDA for an IUSS cycle. So it's a very important fact that if you say you follow the guidelines, which Medicare and your state Department of Health, as well as accreditation organizations, should be asking for you, how does your organization, how is this organization defining the term immediacy? And if you define immediacy as it is being recognized only when it involves a packaging system that cannot be stored for future use, you would see that that would not involve a one tray because one tray has storage for future use. So finishing up here, I just want to say, surveys and inspections, of course, are normal in our daily lives. Most of them are, most of them can be either announced or unannounced. Many are unannounced these days, especially if they're tied to a dean status, a CMS survey. So how can you be ready for a survey or an inspection? My best advice to you is that you need to be prepared. You get prepared through orientation, through training of your staff, through the development of competencies, through policy and procedure formation that is current and usable and known to the staff. You can't have thousands of pages of policies and procedures, and that's not an exaggeration, and I would say to you even hundreds of pages, because it is not realistic that your staff would be able to answer questions of a surveyor or an inspector, because it just isn't possible for them to know all of those pages and memorize them. Your documentation needs to include your instructions for use, as well as your SDS, your safety data sheets. You should profess that everyone in your department understands what you use in your department and be able to explain to anyone who comes in to survey you or inspect you what you're using in your department. I hope that's been helpful, because it's very, very difficult to look at new technology except if you have the basics and you understand the basics. So with that, I'm going to look to see here, and pardon me, because I'm going to look at my phone to see if there's been any questions that have come since we started this presentation. So I will see. And I do not see any that have come in, but my email address is on this slide for contact information, as well as my telephone. I travel extensively. I live on Eastern time zone, so if you're lucky, you'll get me in East Coast time, but it's possible that I could be on the West Coast. So seeing no questions that have come through, I will close this presentation, and thank you very much for your attention. Have a nice day.